He caught the monkey's tail. That is the moment. Not the battles, not the years of solitary training that made him faster than anyone alive, not the massacre that took his village and everyone in it. The moment that actually changed him was a monkey that was using his own techniques against him, having the time of its life, and a man who had been burning with hatred for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like not to burn, reaching out, catching a tail, and feeling the last of the weight lift. He had spent years becoming more lethal than he had ever been. He had not, until that moment, become more free. His name is Master Yi. He is the last master of Wuju. And the story of how a man who survived everything still managed to lose himself, and what found him again, is the story that the Wuju tradition has always been trying to teach. New here? Subscribe. Every week, a League of Legends story told the way it deserves to be heard. Wuju was not simply a fighting style. This is the first thing to understand about it, and it is the understanding that most people who hear the name fail to arrive at. A fighting style is a collection of techniques, optimized movements, developed over time, refined for the specific purpose of making the person practicing them more effective in combat. You can learn a fighting style without it changing what you are. You can be good at a fighting style without it having anything to do with who you are. When you are not fighting, Wuju was not that. Wuju was a philosophy that expressed itself through movement, the discipline of training body and mind, until action and thought became the same thing, until the gap between intention and execution collapsed entirely, until what you wanted to do and what your body did were not two events separated by the interval of decision, but one continuous thing, not reflex, not automaticity, something deeper than both, the specific integration of a person whose inner and outer life had become genuinely unified. In the village where Yi grew up, everyone practiced some form of it. The children learned the foundations before they could explain what they were learning. The elders had been practicing for decades. The community was organized around the understanding that the cultivation of this integration, this alignment between what you were inside and how you moved through the world, was the primary purpose of a human life. Yali was exceptional at it even before he was considered a master. The quality he had was not simply speed, though he was fast in a way that defied ordinary accounting. It was something more fundamental, a relationship between perception and response that made the moment of contact between what he saw and what he did shorter than most people thought physically possible. Opponents who sparred with him described the experience as fighting something that was not quite in the same time as they were. He was present where they were going to be rather than where they were. This was considered beautiful in Wuju terms, not because of its combat utility, though that was undeniable, because it was the living demonstration of what the practice was supposed to produce. A person so fully present that the usual gap between perception and action had closed. When Noxus came to Ionia, it came with the specific logic of an empire that had decided the most efficient path through resistance was not to defeat it but to remove it. Soldiers can be killed or captured, techniques can be stolen or countered. A tradition, however, the specific community of practice, the teachers and students, and the decades of accumulated refinement, if that is destroyed, what it produced cannot simply be reconstructed from the outside. The Wuju students were effective against Noxian infantry, more effective than the numbers should have permitted, because effectiveness in combat is not simply a function of physical capability, but of the integration between will and action, and that integration in people who had spent their lives developing it produced something that trained soldiers who had not developed it could not fully account for. Noxus noticed. The High Command did what High Commands do when they encounter something their standard approaches cannot resolve. They identified the source and addressed the source directly. The chemical attack on the Wuju village was not a military action in any traditional sense. There was no tactical objective to be achieved by destroying that particular location. What was destroyed was the location's significance, the people who carried the tradition, the community that sustained the practice, the generational continuity that would have passed Wuju forward. Some died immediately, others survived the physical exposure but did not survive what it did to their minds. The attack was designed to leave no continuation. It was largely successful. Yi came back to ruins. He had been on other fronts when it happened. The kind of soldier who is sent where the fighting is hardest, which means the kind of soldier who is away from home when home is attacked. Ice. He returned to a village that had been a living community and was now the evidence of what happens when an empire decides that a community's existence is a military problem. His body was intact. Everything else was something he would spend years trying to account for. The emotion that organized itself from the wreckage was not grief exactly. Grief requires a space for loss to inhabit, and what he felt did not leave space for anything except itself. It was hatred, clean, focused, oriented, directed at specific people who had made specific decisions that had produced specific outcomes. The Noxian commanders who had ordered the attack, the officers who had carried it out, the empire that had created the conditions under which this kind of calculation could be made. He withdrew, he trained, he made himself more dangerous than he had been, which, given where he had started, was a considerable achievement. He refined techniques that had been developed for combat and made them more lethal, stripped away elements that prioritized the practitioner's growth in favor of elements that produced maximum damage to opponents. He was becoming, by any external measure, extraordinarily capable. He was also moving directly away from what Wuju was. The tradition had never been about lethality. It had been about integration, about the closing of the gap between inner and outer, about the alignment of practice with purpose, about becoming fully present to whatever you were doing, rather than using it as an instrument for something else. He was using Wuju as an instrument for revenge, and the using as instrument was, by Wuju's own understanding, precisely the thing that prevented the deepest mastery. You could not become one with a practice while treating it as a means to an end. He knew this. Somewhere underneath the hatred, he could not access the knowing. There is a specific quality to grief that has organized itself around a purpose, the way it narrows the available world to the single channel of the purpose. Everything outside the channel becomes irrelevant or invisible. The people around Yi during those years have described it as being in the presence of someone who was not quite there, as if the most alive part of him had gone somewhere ahead and left the functional remainder to continue operating in the meantime. The monkey appeared without explanation. Yi had no account for it afterward that fully satisfied him. It was simply there, larger than a common monkey, moving with a quality that suggested awareness well beyond what monkeys were generally assumed to possess. It watched him train. Then, with the specific boldness of something that has assessed a situation and decided the situation is acceptable, it began to imitate him. This would have been merely strange if the imitation had been approximate. It was not. The monkey was copying his techniques with a fidelity that required it to have understood them, not just observed them, to have grasped not just the movement pattern but the mechanical principle underneath the movement pattern. Yi watched this for a moment that he later described as genuinely disorienting. He tried to shoo the monkey away. The monkey used his own techniques on him. Not perfectly. There was play in it, a quality of the monkey genuinely enjoying the exchange, treating the whole thing as exactly what it looked like from the outside, a game. But the application was sophisticated enough that Yi found himself actually engaged, not performing combat, actually engaged. responding to something that was responding to him, in the specific dynamic of genuine sparring, rather than the isolated practice he had been doing for years. He noticed something happening as it continued. The channel that had narrowed to revenge was very slightly opening. There was room in him for this, for the specific quality of attention that an actual opponent, or whatever the monkey was, demanded, for something that was not the hatred. He was not fully present with the anger anymore. He was present here, with this. The moment he caught the tail, he was himself again. Not the version of himself that had existed before the village was destroyed. That version was not coming back, and he had not expected it to. A different self. One that could hold what had happened without being held by it. One that understood, in the specific way that understanding arrives after a very long approach, what Wuju had been trying to teach him all along, that you cannot bring full presence to a practice you are using as an instrument. That the mastery he had been pursuing through hatred was precisely what the hatred was preventing him from reaching. He released the tail. He released what he had been holding alongside it. The monkey wanted to learn Wuju. This was, by any standard, an unusual request, made through whatever combination of gesture and demonstrated intention makes interspecies communication possible when one of the parties is determined enough. Yi spent some time with the proposition before accepting it, but here was also what the proposition contained: a reason to teach. A student. The possibility of continuation of the tradition that had been specifically targeted for destruction surviving, through transmission to a new generation that could not have been anticipated by the people who had done the targeting. He had been trying to honor his people through destroying those who had destroyed them. It had not worked and could not work. Destruction does not honor the dead, it only extends the violence that killed them. What could honor them was the thing they had actually cared about. The practice, passed forward, carried by whoever was capable of carrying it. He had a student now. He would find more. The Wuju tradition was not over. It had survived the attack, not because Yi had survived it, but because the attack had not extinguished what made Wuju worth surviving: the integration. The presence, the closing of the gap between inner and outer, that was still alive. It was alive in him. He had just found it again. If this story reached you, subscribe. Every week, the full lore of a League of Legends champion, told the way it deserves to be heard.